Okay, I really want to thank Alish and all the team who have invited me here, and I must say I'm really excited to see so many of you. I did not, I have to admit, think that there was so much interest also here in Helsinki. But when I had an email from Alicia and her friends, I thought even if it's just a few people, it's worth making the trip to Helsinki to sit and discuss what's happening in the Middle East, in Kurdistan, and of course now in the world's attention is concentrated and focused on Rojava and in it Kobani. Alicia introduced me a little. Yes, I am from the International Initiative, and what does it do, the International Initiative? Since '99, after Öcalan's being kidnapped from Kenya in February, the initiative was established in March of that year by just average people all over the world, personalities, politicians, Nobel Peace and Literature Prize winners. And so ever since then, as you will see from the name, we've been striving to demand freedom at a time when nothing was clear back in '99 when he was kidnapped, what will happen actually in the region to him and to the Kurds. So as also mentioned, we translate books and other materials, and the brochures you see over there have also been compiled by us from many different books of Öcalan. He has in total more than 60, 13 of which have been written in prison. And also we have some different campaigns like Art for Öcalan campaign, and you can see one of the works of a German artist back in '99 when he was first kidnapped. Now, of course, I'm not totally aware of how much do you know of the Kurdish issue, and I presume that it's different levels of knowledge from person to person. So I think I'd like to say a few words as to the international context of the Kurdish issue at first. Kurdish people are an indigenous people of Mesopotamia. They are indigenous along with Assyrians, Armenians, Arabs, Persians, Baluchians, and all the other people in the Middle East. One could say the only unindigenous people into the region is the Turkish nation. So maybe we will not go very far, but we will start from the First World War and how the status quo that has been put after the First World War has been kept to date. Only maybe there are some very few additions to it. So there has been no new states since then. So all other nations have been denied states. Before this, there was, of course, Kurdistan was divided between the two empires, Sassanid and also the Ottoman empires. And as these empires collapsed, what happened is that Kurdistan was then not divided as a result of wars between, let's say, the Turkish state and the Kurds, or the Persians and the Kurds, or the Arabs and the Kurds. But as you may have heard about the Sykes-Picot and then the Lausanne, you will know then how the division of the Kurdish homeland has come about. So in fact, to be able to understand the complexity of the Kurdish question, we need to see the intentions and the aim of the superpowers of back then, like the French, like the British, and etc. So while the Kurdish homeland was divided into two between these empires, the Kurds were quite autonomous. And after the collapse of these empires, there was the formation of nation states in the Middle East as well, just like in Europe. So what happened is that Syria was established after First World War as a French mandate, and Iraq was established as a British mandate, and the two big empires ended up being Iran and also Turkey. So in April 1946, if we talk about Syria, it gained independence, and then in the 1960s it was governed by the Ba'athist regime. So let's talk a little bit more about Syria, because we will get into more into Rojava as well. What happened is that after the reign of the Ba'athist regime, Syria was declared to be an Arabic nation state, an Arabic republic. So which effectively meant that the more relaxed regime before the Ba'athist regime turned into a more of an Arabic nation than ever before. So in 1962, many Kurds in Syria were stripped of their citizenship. You know, it was like a deception. Some were asked to bring in their papers, and they were never given new ones. So you ended up having a lot of Kurds who were called alien, which meant that they could not go to university, they could not own land, they could not, you know, do most of the things that a citizen would be able to do. And then in 1965, what they did was they started to settle Arabic people in the Kurdish homeland in order to be able to separate, so that the Kurdish strip along the, you know, the borders would not be a whole strip, but it would be intermittent with some Arab enclaves there. I mean, of course, this is important to know, because when we come to talk about cantons, the Rojava cantons, we will see that there are 3 cantons, and these 3 cantons are separated now with the Arab enclaves that have been created back in that 1965 in history. There are, you know, still there isn't a good population count, but maybe around 4 million Kurds in Syria at the very least. And overall, I don't know, I for myself, for example, for the past 20 years have been saying there are 40 million Kurds. So I don't know, probably it's a lot more now in the last 20 years, but there isn't a proper count at all in general of the Kurdish people. So the Kurdish denial is, as I said, is an international one. Ever since it has been partitioned and given under the these different countries, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, and ever since the world system operates on officiality of nation states and the legitimacy of nation states, Kurds have not had the opportunity to make their voices heard. Kurdish people in all parts of Kurdistan have been facing extreme grievances, atrocities, massacres, genocides, you know, locally, in general, in all parts, they have experienced this. But despite that, they have had no place to go. And each time that they would revolt against this, it has been harshly suppressed. And their attempts to defend themselves have met with, you know, criminalization policies around the world. So in effect, Kurds have not been only resisting against the policies of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, but against this international denial policy of the superpowers. And that included the Soviet Union as well. As I said, the status quo consisted of nation states. Anybody outside of that would with the help of everyone together, would be stamped out. And this included, of course, all the Kurdish parties. I mean, until very late, like a couple of months ago or so, the main two political parties of South Kurdistan, KDP and the PUK, were also on the terror list. So in fact, it didn't matter what ideology you had, but to even defy the fact that you were denied as a culture, as an ethnicity, met with harsh suppression from everybody around. But of course, this is beginning to change. I mean, after what you would say, after a lot of tragedies, of course, and a lot of resistance on the part of the Kurdish people. But now, of course, amongst the Kurdish resistance, there are two distinct tendencies coming out. As the Kurdish national question is being settled, as the Kurdish people have no longer slowly a problem of existing, because really we had a problem of existence. I was telling our friends last night that 20 years ago, when I said, for example, that I'm Kurdish, people would say, oh, what is that? Is that something to eat or drink, or what is it? People truly had no idea that such a people existed. And of course, any tendency for the Kurdish people to struggle for their rights was branded immediately as being nationalist. Like the Turkish left, the Iraqi left, the Iranian left would very quickly brand the Kurdish people as, impossible to be leftists. No way, they can only be nationalists, to demand their rights as Kurds. But as I said, as this question is more or less out of the way, let's say that the denial policies are more or less shattered, as the Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan are becoming visible. Syria, this is our topic here, Rojava, the Kurds in Rojava are more visible today than any other time, the Kurds in Turkey. In South Kurdistan, there's a Kurdish regional government there. In Iran, it's a sleeping cell, but Kurds are organizing themselves there and have been struggling for time immemorable. There's always been a struggle over there as well. But as we go along, and today this is why we're here, to be able to talk a little bit about the paradigm or the ideology behind Rojava. What is it really? I mean, where did it come from? Where do they get this spirit or soul of resistance? This little town of Kobani, why is it resisting so badly? This strip of land, which is called Rojava, which really doesn't have very good geographical landscape even to fight, why is it really resisting? So there are now two very distinct tendencies, which is becoming more and more distinct and separate amongst the Kurds as well. One is the statist tendency or paradigm, which strives for a Kurdish nation state, and the other is the non-statist approach, which is mainly at the moment, the non-statist approach is represented by the PKK. Now, as I said, all the parties more or less to date, were excluded from the system. But at the moment, the Kurdish regional government is accepted by the whole world, but the rights of the Kurds in Turkey, in Syria, and in Iran is still not on the table very strongly. Although there is a lot of interest in Rojava, even by the superpowers, but there is no description of how they define Rojava and whether or not they accept the cantons of Rojava in implementation at the moment. So what is this non-statist approach? The reason I would have to say why PKK became so different from the mainstream is because of its approach to three main issues. One is the approach to revolutionary violence. How is and was revolutionary violence viewed by Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, whatever organizations, as well as national liberationist organizations? And the approach to women's freedom, do we just take it, in terms of making women's branches and, they strive to reform the approach to women? And as we mentioned, through pointing out that it's non-statist, what is its approach to state? Why is it non-statist? I mean, on the contrary, if Kurds have been so oppressed, it's the natural thing to demand their own state and to enjoy it, especially at a time when this can, in fact, maybe be possible, indeed. So at the center of PKK's struggle over the 40 years have truly been against local colonialism as well as international colonialism. And it has looked for alternatives to capitalism continuously. Now, of course, this is not to say that the point reached today was, the point reached back in 1978. This would not be, this would be an exaggeration to say that. But what is important to say is that even back in its formation, PKK was never dogmatic. While all the movements fell in line either with China or, or Russia, Soviet Union or wherever else, PKK saw it fit to creatively implement Marxist-Leninism. And this is how it described itself at its formation as well. So in this book, which we have only 2 copies here, I'm sorry about that. It shows you how little I expected the turnout to be. But in that book, you will find out the background to the Kurdish question and the complexities involved in it, and the history of the PKK. Because if you consider that PKK was formed in 1978 after being a group starting in 1973, and I always say that, of course, the beginnings determine the end, because as a group, PKK was not only formed of Kurdish people. There were Kurds, there were people from the Black Sea area, possibly Pontus, there were Turkish people, and there were women in the very first organization. So it doesn't just happen, that the women's question is so strong on the agenda. It doesn't just happen that it's not a nationalist movement in that sense, but of course it defends and strives and struggles for Kurdish rights, because that identity is under an annihilation policy and a denial policy. So it chooses to own up to this identity as well. But of course there are things that it did wrong, just like other national liberation movements and other real socialist movements. So therefore, in this book, you will find that Öcalan and the PKK gives a self-critique in terms of not seeing the pitfalls of real socialism and, almost falling in there. But as you can see, it's growing ever stronger because it's not so dogmatic and it's overcoming itself as it goes, which doesn't happen very easily either. So you will find also the discussions on a solution which is now called democratic confederalism, finally. As we said that there were 3 main issues, actually. One of them is the women's revolution. I mean, PKK also based itself on the class conflict as it came about. And mind you, back then, everybody had something to say about the PKK. The left would say they are nationalist. The right would say they are orthodox Stalinist. You know, the religious would say they're atheist, and the atheists would say, no, no, Öcalan is a Sunni Muslim, so he has something else in mind. So you would have, you know, all these differing sections of people thinking different things about the PKK. And I suppose the reason is this. PKK was really against all the status quos, against all of them, because it didn't look at religion as, you know, as most of the left did. It saw it as part of history and humanity. And it analyzed it according to that, and it did not reject it completely. You know. And then, as I said, the women's freedom issue. In the group formation, as I said, there were two women. And then during the atrocities committed in the Diyarbakir prison, right after the coup, there were again, at the beginning, women like Sakine Cansız, who was killed in Paris along with 2 other revolutionaries 3 years ago by the Turkish intelligence services, and with the compliance, we think, of both the French and even the German intelligence agencies as well. So she was one of the founders of the PKK, one of the 2 women that founded the party. And of course, the influx of the women to the PKK was huge. There were several reasons for that. I mean, just like in every society, in the Kurdish society too, within the Kurdish society, it's very patriarchal, and there is a lot of oppression on women. But there was also oppression due to the fact that they were plainly Kurdish, you know, and women. So these several layers of oppression led the Kurdish women to join the party and to see that, you know, there was much more of an ideology than just the Kurdish ethnic identity. So this led to more women even coming to the organization. Öcalan states, and you will find it in that brochure, Liberating Life, I think the name also gives it away, women's freedom does not only concern women. It's of course most and foremost of all, it's our struggle, but it's also a struggle for the whole society, and also there is a need for the struggle of male freedom as well, and their struggle and their striving for their own freedom too. So Öcalan said that all enslavements, he came to the conclusion that all enslavements were built upon women's enslavement. So he's saying that women is the first nation, first class, and first colony. And then followed all the other colonizations of the nature, you know, of this object-subject dichotomy, and then slowly we begin to develop into more stratas in the society. So Öcalan is also perhaps the first political leader, you know, who began with a national liberation Marxist-Leninist organization to coin the word to kill the dominant man as well. So it's very central in the paradigm of the PKK, the struggle against patriarchy. So it's not put away at all. The nation state. PKK too, and you will find in that book there's a self-critique given for that as well. Yes, wish to build a nation state for the Kurds too. But as the reality of the Kurds was so profound, the conflicts and the questions they faced, you know, being colonized by 4 different countries. Let me give you an example. This is not very public, but Syria apparently said, look, we want to accept these cantons, but Iran doesn't want it, for example. I mean, we have things like that in Europe, like we've had discussions, let's say, with Norway. Norway would say, yeah, we would do this, but Germany would not allow us, kind of a thing. So, so in fact, this division into 4 different countries, does not allow the Kurdish question to go at the same pace in every part. Therefore, so this single nation-based statehood we saw was a very dangerous thing, like in Israeli-Palestinian issue as well. I was telling our friends again yesterday that victims can quickly turn into perpetrators. It is not because of them being Kurdish or Jewish or whatever. It's the paradigm and the ideology behind this, because nation states are intrinsically based on uniformity. I mean, I'm not saying that, before nation states creation, the world was a very nice place to live in. No, it wasn't. The conflicts were on different issues, like mainly religion, as we know, especially in Europe and also in the Middle East. And before that, too, it would be on power, conquering of more land, and etc. But the danger, the real danger with capitalism and it basing itself on single nation statehoods is that it is continuously turning the world into a graveyard of identities, different ethnicities, cultures, and etc. Europe went through it in the last 400 years. No nation in Europe itself is a single nationhood or nations. I mean, this is the point, actually. We equate states with nations or nationhood as being states. Therefore, we saw the danger of that and what they were trying to do in Turkey. Maybe in the Middle East, they were very late into this stage because all the peoples of the region were already very ancient, and they were established, and it was really difficult to assimilate them. So you would either have to totally eradicate them, or they wouldn't really assimilate into your system. And look, this is what happened to Assyrians. Not too many of them are left, especially in the region. Armenians, the same way. And they were also quite successful, nearly, with the Kurds too, until, of course, the recent struggle led by the Kurdish freedom movement. And we also saw that actually with this uniformity of nation states, that fascism is quite intrinsic to it. We saw at the first establishments of it in Spain, in Italy, elsewhere, how fascistic it can get and how much of a tool of repression it is. And even today, I mean, we are seeing that with all the things that are going on, the very first step of the states is to take measures of curbing rights of the people. This is the very first steps that they talk about, or they do actually. Approach to violence. This was also another issue taken up. Revolutionary violence is a great concept, and but PKK, through its struggle over 40 years, saw that this violence must be tied down to self-defense. Of course, the nation states as well, what they've done newly is that they have monopolized the right over violence. Through police, through armies, through professionalizing this. Whereas, during the, I'm not here trying to make it sound as if the empires were better. All I'm trying to do is to show how things moved in time. And so this has been monopolized, and the people have been stripped off of their right to self-defense, unless it's to their home, and even then I think it's quite complicated. I'm not a lawyer, but even if somebody attacks you at your home, it's quite complicated. So the concept of violence adopted by the PKK now is tied down to, as I said, to self-defense. And it should not be left to the mercy of the men alone. It must not be professionalized, and it must be accountable to bottom-up structures. So in Rojava at the moment, for example, the local asayish, they try to not to call it police, they are trying to also find new terminology for these things. The asayish over there is not professionalized, and all the people are going through some educational stuff in terms of self-defense, and the decisions on this is given by the local assemblies, and they're accountable to the local assemblies. And of course there are women's unique self-defense units as well, both in Rojava and elsewhere, and maybe we'll come to that a little bit more. Now, PKK thought that modernity is such a huge term that it should not be just left to the capitalists. I mean, what about all the labor work put in by the ordinary people in the making of this modernity? So they're dividing it into two modernity. They are saying one aspect of it is capitalist modernity, which is defined by three major issues: capitalism, industrialism, and nation state. On the other hand, the one that represents us, those who have been struggling for the past 5,000 years at least, throughout the history of patriarchy, and that is also called democratic modernity. And here, instead of capitalism, to have social economy based on use value. And instead of industrialism, we're not suggesting that we should go back to the old Stone Age or whatever, but have ecologic industry. And this should also be tied down to local assemblies, and as well as when you have democratic confederalism at a regional perhaps level as well. So from bottom up, it should be decided on. And instead of nation state, a state based on a single nation, it should be democratic nation, not based on a single ethnic identity. Involved in this democratic confederalism, there are a few things, because obviously we cannot change whole of Turkey. We cannot change whole of Iran or Iraq or Syria. But what can be done, and this is what's being attempted both in Turkey and also in Syria, is to turn these states into democratic republics. And by that, also it means that the relationship between the democratic autonomy of the Kurds and that democratic republic should be through the representative democracies as well. And democratic autonomy, as I said, let's say would be for the North Kurdistan, for Rojava, for South Kurdistan, and for the Iranian Kurdistan. And democratic confederalism would be for all these democratic autonomies to have some loose relationship with each other on the basis of democratic, ecological, and gender-liberated society. So we are tending to actually distinguish between state and democracy as well. I mean, state and democracy don't go well hand in hand. The more state you have, the less democracy you have. So the more democracy you have, you will have less state. So the intention of this paradigm is to while, you know, trying to implement democratic autonomy, democratic confederalism, is to take from hands of the state the things it legitimizes itself with, you know, and tries to make us think that without the state mechanism, there is no way we can continue with our lives, you know. So this is what is trying to be done by distinguishing these two. And so to leave the state effectively as a very small coordinating point. So in this democratic nation, you will have diverse languages, religions, ethnicities, cultures, and interests. You would find it so surprising, let me tell you, that even within the Kurds now, everybody is talking about creating a whole Kurdish, for example. You know, I mean, it's the thing, isn't it? When you become a nation state, you have to uniform the language as well, you know. So, these discussions are in fact inevitable because, as I said, it's intrinsic to nation states. You will have to uniform everybody into the same, you know, streaming kind of a thing, into the same thing. So, because people think, oh, you know, yeah, but, you know, we can't have schools in so many dialects. That's going to be so expensive. This is the mind that the mind works like that, you know, automatically. You don't think of the human lives or the culture behind that language or the enormous human memories that that language holds with itself, but you think of the money that will go if you have schools for different languages. But I ask you, universities are only a make of the last 300-400 years. What did people do before? I mean, as far as I know, like in the ancient Greece and before that in Mesopotamia, in Sumerians, in even the Neolithic, you know, people found so many new innovations, and they did not do that through universities. So what I am trying to say is that with this nation state, we have been given a mindset, and we try to put that mindset to every question that we face. And then what we do is, despite the fact that we struggle against this mentality, we repeat it, we reproduce it. This is why victims become perpetrators. It's that simple, actually, in a way. Yeah, so this is what we're doing. We're saying that nationhood does not equal statehood. Now let's slowly come to the Rojava, the practice of Rojava, but of course with all this in the back of our minds. The world has actually been in a structural crisis for a while. Capitalism is in a structural crisis, and so we are actually going through a chaos, a systemic chaos, and the struggles waged at the moment will actually determine what kind of a result we will reach. Of course, the superpowers led by US and the UK tried to overcome these crises by going into places that they were not able to completely conquer. I mean, the thing about the Middle East and Africa is not just about, let's say, the Middle East, about the oil. It's about assimilating into this capitalist modernity. Now, by saying this, I'm not saying that the resistance over there, as we can see by Daesh or ISIS, is not a very, it's not progressive at all. But that's another story. The fact is that there is this resistance of cultures not wanting to be assimilated into this capitalist modernity. So they tried it through different ways. Occupation of Afghanistan, then Iraq, and then when this all didn't work, they tried to set up proxy Islamic movements so that they could reconcile capitalism and political Islam. And in alignment with this, the AKP was actually formed in Turkey. So AKP was given a role of leading the Islamic world into, let's say, assimilation or more, reconciliation with capitalism and with the US. Now, of course, they had series of what they called Arab Springs. Of course, I have to say this, Arabic people too are genuinely they do also want a more humane, more democratic society and world to live in with their individual and collective rights. But the unfortunate thing with the Arab Spring was that what the superpowers did was to get on this wave. They used this desire for a better life of the Arab people to design the Middle East according to themselves. Because the unfortunate thing there was that there was no alternative organized or put in front of the Arab people as they were rebelling or revolting. So what they did at the end was change regimes, but according to themselves. Look at Libya, for example. Do we see it much better than it was before? It's much worse. There is no Libya. It's war-stricken. Afghanistan, it's terrible. Saudi Arabia, Tunisia is a bit better because Tunisia was more genuine in that sense, And so the Kurds saw this actually, especially in Syria. They were grooming Turkey to take the place of the power vacuum left by Iran and Syria. And you saw at the beginning, Erdogan was best buddies with Assad family. They went on holidays together. And then suddenly, he became the biggest enemy of Syria. And the reason for that was that Turkey was given the leadership of the Sunni Islam world, from Africa to Balkans to the Middle East. And this is why when Erdogan won his second election, general election, he opened his winning speech as saying, "I salute Damascus to Bosnia-Herzegovina." He started like this. He didn't say, "I salute Istanbul," or even Ahmed or whatever. He started with the old borders of the Ottoman Empire. So the neo-Ottoman aspirations of Turkey was quite encouraged. And Turkey was given that role. Even Turkey has been given the role for the Palestinians too. You saw in Davos how he, did the 1 minute thing. But in reality, we are seeing that there's nothing done for that question to be resolved. Now, of course, in Syria, this is what was pushed upon the Kurdish people. When the war started there, they had a Free Syrian Army, which they would not accept the Kurdish people. The PYD and all that, they went and they said, "Look, we want to take our place in the Free Syrian Army as well." Oh, they said, "Well, Kurds, we'll deal with you later." We know what that means. We've had 4 states, and they've changed many power changes has occurred in those 4 states. We know what "we deal with you later" means. So, no, they did not accept it. They did not take the Kurds in Geneva 1 and 2 either. And therefore, Kurds saw that they will neither side with Assad, because Assad doesn't offer anything progressive for the Kurds either, or for anybody else for that matter. So their third way, they offered to Assad, but he said no. And to the Free Syrian Army, they said no. So the Kurds said, okay, let's be objective. Whoever I support will later on suppress me. So what they did was they opted for a third way, which we've been talking about. It's democratic confederalism, and democratic autonomy. So a democratic Syria, a democratic autonomy for the Kurds and other peoples in the region. I mean, that's why we'd like to coin the word Rojavans, you know, because the people who live in Rojava at the moment are not only the Kurds. And so there is the plurality of cultures and ethnicities and also beliefs. There are Yazidis who live in Rojava. They are Kurdish, but their belief is Yazidi. And there are Assyrians who are Christians, and maybe atheists amongst them as well. And also there are Alevis and Sunnis who live in the region with different beliefs. So here is some extract from the social contract of Rojava. I mean, even, you know, they are not calling it exactly the constitution, because constitution rings the bell of more of states and stuff, but a social contract, a contract between the people who live together, and to reorganization and the curbing down of power and hierarchy. So in order to be able to do this, they have declared these 3 regions as autonomous regions and called it a confederation of these different types of people who live there. So they've actually put in there equality and, you know, justice, freedom, and democracy in their social contract. And I'm sure you can find it on the internet, and there are very many good principles stated there. So the 3 cantons are self-ruled. Yes, I think I've said the other ones before, so let's jump to here. In Rojava, you will find co-presidency at all levels, from the, you know, bottom up to the highest position, 1 woman and 1 man. The reason for this, I mean, this is not just done to, you know, as a showcase, but it's to increase the presence and the role of women in all aspects of life. This is from self-defense units to economy, to education, to politics, to whatever. So you have actually a couple of points of decision-making here. You have the youth autonomous, because we know the youth can be suppressed by the society as well, you know, because they are more open to development, less dogmatic, and etc. But they can be taken under the wings of the others, and so aligned into maybe other ideological thoughts. So the youth is autonomous, the women's is autonomous, the women's movement. They have their own structure, just like the general society structure at every level, you have the women's structure as well. Like they have their own communes, they have their own collectives, and of course, some are also, I mean, it's a joint life, they are also in collective, joint communes and collectives as well. But everywhere the woman is also organized separately, so that she can take decisions that is concerning her. And of course, other ethnicities too. They have their own communes, assemblies, and etc. So what this creates is that less centric governance, because you have all different identities, groups, or women, or, you know, who have been traditionally suppressed, having their own structures to take decisions on their own behalf. And you have, of course, city and neighborhood councils as well. I don't want to say too much about Daesh because a lot has been said. Daesh, yes, is a byproduct of regional and world powers. You've heard Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey especially. Turkey is now trying to use actually Daesh in order to for its own aims. Especially in Rojava, Daesh was not really attacking the Kurdish cantons at the beginning, but with the reorientation of Turkey and its help to Daesh, they've started now attacking in Haseki, not only in Kobani, and it looks like they will target Afrin to be the next. I mean, these are the kinds of news that are coming out. Now, of course, Daesh is not just purely a make of the foreigners, let's say, in quotations. It also has a background and a culture that allows such a thing to reproduce itself. So the PKK and Öcalan has been also saying this for a while. Islam has to also reform itself. I mean, it's stayed almost the same, maybe much worse than the same, very dogmatically frameworked, and therefore a revolution or a change by internal dynamics, though, not imposed by the outside, because this causes reaction, and reaction to defend oneself. Now, of course, in South Kurdistan, we have a different practice. The South Kurdish regime is going very fast into nation statism over there. So there are actually efforts to declare the Shengal region as a canton, but this is met with the fiercest resistance by the KDP. The Kurdistan Democratic Party of the Barzani. I have to point out that the Yazidi region, Shengal region, is not even inside the Kurdish regional government at the moment. When the agreement was made with Iraq in terms of Kurdish regional government, Shengal was left out of it. So what the Kurdish freedom movement is trying to do is to make sure that these different ethnicities and beliefs don't leave the region. Because this is also another thing that is trying to be achieved. Make the place uniform. You have this strip of Sunni Islam, you have strip of Shia Islam, you have then Kurds, and then you have Turkey or whatever. So, and this is how we see the attacks against the Yazidis as well, and also the Assyrians in the Nineveh plain. And so there's every bit of effort made to make sure that these people stay there and take their own defense. Because we saw how the Iraqi army and also the Kurdish Peshmerga left the Yazidi Kurds and the Turkmens and the Shabaks, you know, the Shia Turkmens, and also the Sunni Arabs to be faced with this kind of a force. So Daesh actually thought that it will be wiping through all the regions, you know, because nobody before the Kurds in Kobani actually stood up to them. So this was the reason why it was very strategic Kobani for them, because this illusion that was created about Daesh broke down. You know, oh my God, they are chopping heads. Oh my God, they are doing this, you know. Like there was this scare vision perpetuated throughout the world about Daesh, as if it's unstoppable. You know, it can't come from out of nowhere, you know. But anyway, the Kurds, both in Shengal and also later around Erbil and Mahmud, were able to stop the Daesh forces. And I think that Kurdish regional government did not expect Daesh to come all the way to Erbil, because, I mean, there are agreements as to what can happen as well in the Middle East. I mean, Daesh is not a force of its own. There are many theories around. One is that Israel is also supporting Daesh because Daesh's main aim is to break Iraq apart into three. One is the Kurdish nation state, which will be a very good ally for Israel for the future. For example, this is one of the theories that are coming out. So, in effect, what was being done there, and I think this is where the Kurdish regional government was very surprised, they didn't expect that Daesh would come all the way to Mahmur, which is only a few kilometers away from Erbil, which is like the capital of the Kurdish regional government, and that nobody would do anything about it, apart from the PKK guerrillas, you know. And so they were stopped at the doorsteps of all these cities, and Erbil is not very far away from Turkey either. So they were stopped at the doorsteps. Ethnic cleansing was actually stopped by this courageous struggle because they did not have heavy weaponry. And you will remember only after this the discussions about, oh, Kurds have no weaponry came about, and they dumped all the old weaponry into the Middle East. So what's happening in South Kurdistan, I have to tell you, I've been there. Barbaric capitalism is at work. I mean, they are destroying the nature at every cost. They are uprooting people from all their cultural, you know, aspects, and you have this interesting human being created over there. I have to say, I mean, they are my kins. They are Kurdish as well, and I've been there, and it's shocking, I have to say. I don't want to go into further details, but at the time, 200,000 people were saved by cars and on foot, and they were placed in camps. And these people are, of course, in extreme difficulties, especially now that it's winter. And Turkey, the camps in Turkey are not very well being looked after. And they're also imposed on the Rojavans who've come there. They're also imposed, the assimilationist policies are imposed there as well. They are being taught Turkish and etc. Just a little bit about Turkey and North Kurdistan. Why is there a talks for talks at the moment? Well, not because, you know, Turkey came to the end of its, you know, like it suddenly developed a conscience and it felt pity for the Kurds. But they tried all possible means of repression on the Kurds. And they almost auto-assimilated the Kurds, like myself. I only learned Kurdish after the age of 23. I speak it fluently now. But they almost succeeded, because after so many genocides and also suppressive methods where, for example, if you have a bad Turkish accent, you can't find a job. So people like would raise their kids without teaching them Kurdish, so they would not develop later an accent in Turkish. Now, since the beginning, the talks started back in '93, actually. I'm not going to go into that history because that's a history on its own. But the most serious of talks have begun in 2013. During the imprisonment, there were other talks, and the roadmap for negotiations, you will find the book, is a document that has been written to the Turkish state for talks for talks. Talks for talks, yeah. So there have been more than 23 visits by the HDP MPs. HDP is the newly formed pro-Kurdish question being resolved party all around Turkey. And Öcalan communicates with the PKK and KCK through the letters he writes, and these MPs take it to the Kandil Mountains, to the PKK officials. The talks with state are uncertain to date. Turkey really attached this to the Rojava developments at the beginning. And Öcalan also at the time said that if Turkey does not change its act in Rojava, the talks will fail. So it's still dependent on the developments in Kobani and also on the steps the Turkish government will take before the elections. Because it's been a couple of elections that AKP has been playing for time. So both Öcalan and the PKK have said that if formal steps are not taken, they will not make this election very easy at all. And the funny thing is, maybe you'd like to know, since 2011, Öcalan cannot see his lawyers though. So his defense rights are totally violated. No lawyer has been able to see him, but the MPs can. And this is not really lawful, you know. So they are still doing a lot of arbitrary things. There is a ceasefire in place, but the ceasefire is breached by the Turkish state in different manners, like doing dams, that damages the ecology, and also building very strong military posts in Kurdistan. You know, not against Iran or Daesh or whatever, but in Lice, in Ahmed, for example, where there is no threat but the Kurdish people, you know. So there are such things, and there has been some retaliation on the part of the Kurdish guerrillas against these. So the system there, let me try to tell you a little bit about it. You have the People's Democracy Party, HDP, which represents the peoples who accept this democratic autonomy and confederalism in parliament, in the Turkish parliament. I mean, they represent not only the Kurds, but everyone who is accepting this paradigm. So they are the representatives in the representative democracy. Then you have the DBP, which is the Democratic Regions Party, which go in for elections for the municipalities. You know, because we are trying to have the municipalities in terms of libertarian municipalities. And then there is the DTK, which is the Democratic Society Congress, which is a project for the whole of Kurdistan, and there are no such official, you know, like state-like, let's say, elections, but DTK organizes it, it's chosen by the bottom-up procedures. And there is also co-presidency over there as well. And of course, a future vision of Middle East confederation is envisaged. What now? Well, actually, they agree on a smaller Kurdistan, which is the south of Kurdistan, and which was widely reclaimed all over the world as just the Kurdistan. You know, like when you talked of Kurdistan, it would have been just the Kurdish regional government. The flag would be that flag, you know. So there was this imposure and trying to create legitimization for only one part of Kurdistan, while the rest of the Kurdistan is being sacrificed for this. So it's like, you know, we'll create something here, but the rest, you know, don't say a thing. And this is why the Kurdish regional government was actually very bad towards Rojava. Before the Daesh attack on Shengal, on Erbil, and on Mahmur. And to date, they have not declared acceptance of the Rojava cantons as well. So it shows you the ideological differences and the paradigmatic differences between the differing movements. Okay, so the way we look at it is that it looks like they will try to keep a level of war in Kurdistan with Daesh, effectively making Kurds battle for their livelihood against Daesh, which, you know, they have to in order to be able to live. Otherwise, they will have to leave their homeland and emigrate to places and effectively vacate the region and hand it over to this fascistic group. And this they can see, especially with Rojava, is not going to happen. One can say that. And it's also, of course, great to see that there was such a huge rally and support from all over the world, likening it to from Guernica of the, back in the fascist Spain times. Now there is a new enemy created in the form of ISIS, of course. Yuppie, everyone can now do the best they can. I mean, all the Jewish people are now going towards Israel, yuppie, And then, now we are told that the day after the attack in Paris, we were told by UK that they will uplift encryption. No, it's a no-go, So everybody can now base themselves on Daesh to do their work, to curb more rights, and to put people and beliefs against one another. So if we do not see the realities for they are, we can jump to conclusions, of course. And we can, then start to take opposing positions and stances towards one another. But this is not a solution at all. We've seen it in the past, and we are seeing it today as well. So it is a surprise, of course, in the midst of nationalism and religionism hitting the peak, the only progressive force with a non-state aim is the PKK. So it is really a decisive moment for the future of all peoples in the Middle East, not only for the Kurds. Because if the Kurds too opt for a nation-status solution, this will be the beginning of more wars, just as before. With our existence, it should not be that we should be put again against others, but our existence should be there for the existence of all, not to be played against the other. As I said at the beginning, since the whole world is going through a structural crisis, whatever happens there will have its repercussions around the whole world as well. A more reactionary situation in the Middle East will definitely mean a more reactionary capitalism, more backward capitalism, if you can say that in inverted commas, around the world as well, because they will justify themselves with what's going on. So what will happen is that this struggle will, all of our struggles put together, the one over there physically especially, but the ones over here as well, to be able to determine the outcome of this chaos, to be a new system indeed. What can you guys do here? I'm sure maybe you're interested. I think it's happening all around the world, but it needs to happen more, that the cultural, political, and social arenas are more open to Kurds. Maybe they should be able to explain and define themselves a little bit more and try to explain what exactly they are looking for. Recognize the Kurdish people's right to self-determination. This may mean a non-statist solution. But the thing is, the world is not ready to describe what this is. If it's not a state, how is it going to accommodate it? This is also another problem. David Graba was in Rojava just before the new year. He said there was a airport in Kamışlı, and I know there is one in Kamışlı. He said it was still at the hands of the Syrian state. And he asked the people there, why are you not taking it? They said, well, we can take it in a second, but it doesn't mean anything because we are cantons, we are not a state, and no non-state has an airport. So we don't know what to do with it, even if we have it, So there are issues like that as well, of course. And support for the cantons. And the fact that in today's world, self-governance models like this without turning into states can work, can exist. And maybe something more practical is the huge need for doctors and nurses and medicine in the area. Of course, Öcalan must be free, despite the contrary belief that is trying to be perpetuated around the world. He has done nothing wrong, actually, apart from trying to speak up for a nation that has been trying to be annihilated. And he is the people's choice, actually. Maybe there are no referendums official for Kurdish people, but a signature campaign in 2005-06 under very bad conditions and even imprisonment resulted in 3 million signatures. And now a worldwide signature campaign resulted more than 7 million signatures for his freedom. And this is also true for the start of real negotiations with the Kurdish movement. As Mandela said, only free men can negotiate. And as you know, Mandela was also, and the ANC was also criminalized and on the terror lists, and for a long, long time seen as that. His freedom will show the Kurdish people that it is a decisive step forwards and it is not irreversible, and that it has gone into a real negotiation. Finally, let me talk about this. I know I talked so much. God, it's very long. But there's a conference that we are holding, and the International Initiative is part of the organization here. The very first one we did in 2012 in Hamburg University, again in Germany. It is, as the name suggests, the Kurds are challenging capitalist modernity. They are trying to implement one. They are not just talking about it. They are actively, almost in all parts, at the same time, with all its weaknesses, problems, mistakes, are trying to implement a different paradigm. And this is quite revolutionizing. Capitalism tried to tell us, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that, you know, it's the end of the world. I mean, we are able to accept that the world can end, but we cannot perhaps accept that capitalism, we can overcome capitalism. So I think the Kurdish example, amongst others, like the Zapatista and all that, are showing us that it can be overcome. And so in the second conference, held 3 to 5th of April, which is the Easter weekend, it's the long weekend, we will hold a 3-day conference where we will have people coming from Rojava as speakers. We will have John Holloway coming from Mexico, talking about more the Zapatista experience as well as his general approach to capitalism and alternative ways. David Graba, Janet Beal. We will have politicians from the bottom-up structures from Turkish Kurdistan, as well as Iran and Kurdistan regional area in South Kurdistan. So there is the address. I hope you consider coming, and thank you for patiently listening to me.